whole
Yeah.
world. All
Right.
hell will break loose. It doesn't have to.
Yeah.
The train is going down the road, and I see the cliff, like you just said. Let's put the brakes on. We know
Yeah.
what to do.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to WorldView. I'm Petrus. WorldView is a podcast where we explore everyone's perspective on all things that can broaden our worldview. If you've watched some of our previous videos, please consider subscribing, liking, and donating on Patreon. Today, we're talking with Uli Kortsch. Uli is the founder and president of Global Partners Investments, and in his capacity has written a bill for Congress, conferred with approximately 15 presidents, ministers of finance, and ministers of commerce. Before that, he also held various top executive positions like CFO of Dream Builders Incorporated and founder and president of Global Partners Funding. Uli has a master's in business and administration and an honors bachelor's in science, of science in chemistry. He's also fluent in English, German, and well-versed in French. Uli, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Uli, I've been told that you are a native German. You were born in West Germany until the age of 9. Can you please tell us about that story? What you were born in Germany, and what made you come to America?
It's probably a lot more interesting than you think. It was really my father. My father was one of the top 3 people in the largest plastics and cable firm in Northern Europe. My father invented vinyls. He had the first 5 patents out on vinyls.
Really?
Yeah.
That's big.
It was really big. This is why we left. My father is the only exception. Let me back up just for a minute. So post World War II, the Wirtschaftswunder, the economic miracle of the rebuilding of Germany economically. What we don't realize is, as the economy was rebuilt, we killed people. People worked 12, 14 hours a day, 7 days a week, and it never ended. My father is the only exception of everybody he worked with either committed suicide or ended up in an insane asylum.
That's
My
insane.
father is the only exception. And
Wow.
he left. He says, I'm not going to be part of this anymore. So as I said to you, the story is a little more interesting than you probably thought.
Yes.
Yeah, it was brutal from a work perspective. I mean, money was not an object. So within a few years after World War II, like, we had chauffeur-driven limousine holidays, driven. I mean, so when my father quit, he had to give 6 months notice. He gave notice on the day. And he said, we're going to Canada. And they said, well, obviously you're not going to Canada. We know that's a lie, because there's no company in Canada that is advanced as we are. And so we know you're going to the US. We know that's a lie. And we want to tell you categorically, money is not an object. We don't care what they offer you in the US. We can offer you more, because that's not the point. He says, you guys, you're not listening to me. I'm leaving. We are leaving. And then they said, well, obviously you flipped out like, everybody else with all the stress. So I'll tell you what, we'll give you a year off in a place in the mountains. We will pay for absolutely everything. Your whole family will go with you. You have a year's holiday and you get full salary. And he said, you're not hearing me. I'm leaving.
Yeah. Okay. So it was a lot deeper than that. It was the psychological stress. Also, I want to know, why exactly was it? Just the pressure and the motivation to rebuild after the war that pressed people to such extremes? Or
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the country was devastated.
Right.
And the typical German, we can do it. We're fantastic. We're et cetera. That drive can be really positive, and boy, can it be negative. So.
Yeah, no, I can definitely imagine. I had the privilege of living in Germany for about a year, or rather 2 years, in 2 separate occasions. And the German hardworking spirit is definitely something that absolutely radiates in very much everything that they do.
Yeah.
But I mean, in that time, I'm assuming there was more motivation than just simply the German working spirit, because there was also incredibly tense time even after so many years of conflict.
Oh, yeah.
with the two warring ideologies, and of course, West German and East Germany being, almost want to say, the focus of the world between those two conflicts.
Right.
What was that like growing up until the age of 9? And did that contribute to you going to the Americas, Canada first?
I don't, I don't know how to answer that. I mean, there were differences, the East Prussia, the refugees, just like we have trouble with the refugees today. Well, there were German refugees within Germany. Those are the ones that are coming from the East. I mean, part of Russia today used to be German. I mean,
Right.
Germany lost so much territory as a result of the Second World War.
Mm.
And so those Germans flowed into Germany, primarily
Germany.
West Germany, as much as they could. Whatever, we're really getting deep here. My mother and her mother, my grandmother, and my mother's aunt were caught in the Russian front, in the Russian zone, and they knew they had to get out of there. So in the city that they were in, it took them 5 hours to go 2 blocks to not get caught. And ultimately, they crawled on their bellies through a potato field, through the front line between the American and the Russian zones. I mean, it was bad news. It's really, really bad news. So.
That's incredibly intense. That's something, we obviously have so little experience with. In my generation, we've come a long way, and we've not really seen any, war on that scale,
right.
even remotely. That type of life experience in terms of the motivation to get out of East Germany, was that purely motivated by the stories they've heard, or was it the revenge? Sorry, I know this is quite deep, but this is extremely fascinating to something that, frankly, I want to say I'm quite unknowledgeable about. What exactly is that motivation like? Was it just getting away from communism? Was it a political perspective? Was it a fear for life? Or was it a promise of a better future under a different type of political ideology?
Well, I mean, my mother was raped by the Russians, so that was a good reason to leave.
Wow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah.
I'm sorry.
I've been to all those places. I've gone back. I've been to where my mother was raped. I've been to, I went with my parents. My mother actually had a total psychotic break while we were there, which I've never experienced anything like it. I couldn't believe it. So it wasn't communism as such. It was the Russians.
Right.
The two are not the same thing, because
Yeah, of
communism
course.
proper didn't really develop until afterwards in the way that we understand it today. It was already developing, but it was not a clear understanding. And also, my father was on the Western Front. My father was an American POW. When he calls it the best day of his life.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, he says, "Man, that's it. I'm out of this nonsense."
Oh,
So,
wow.
oh yeah.
Okay, so the conflict was so crazy at that point and so
Oh
horrific,
yeah.
being able to be captured by
Oh,
almost, I want to say, probably, as you described, way more fortunate being captured by the Americans necessarily,
oh
but
yeah.
being captured and kicking out of the conflict at that point was a great relief to them
Oh, great
as a
relief.
whole.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
My father was actually moved out of the Eastern Front. I mean, in the Eastern Front, basically everybody either died or was taken captive by the Russians. I mean, the probability of you coming back home was next to nil. I think 5 out of the 100,000 that were in, just outside of Moscow, ultimately in the battle there, 5,000 ended up coming back. I mean, like, it was just, so my father was moved just before then to the Western Front, which probably saved his life. And then
Right.
he was rapidly caught by the Americans. He said, "That's it.
That's, yeah,
Glory,
no.
hallelujah."
Yes. Yeah. And going from that, specifically your parents, and also once you were born in your first 9 years there, and moving to Canada, which, at least in terms of aggression and actual bombing, was quite unaffected by the war in that time. I'm assuming the culture and the people's mentality was something completely different. Did your years, your youth years there, having friends perhaps that weren't affected by it, didn't have the experience that you had and your parents had, did that also change your philosophy, your outlook on life? It made you as successful as you are today?
It probably did in ways that I don't really know. I mean, initially it was very difficult. Obviously, I didn't speak a word of English.
Right.
My father, by the way, didn't either. My mother had 8 years of school English, so for the job interviews, my father very rapidly became very successful in what he was doing. But my mother would go to the job interviews with him because he didn't speak any English.
Right. Right.
So
And she worked as his translator, basically.
yeah, well, indirectly, I mean, he
Right.
picked it up very, 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 very
Mm.
quickly. So
Yeah.
just on that note, just a funny thing that so my father invented vinyls. He was always on the forefront of what was going
Mm.
on. When we moved to Canada, within I think 2 years, he was in charge of pollution control for the whole province of Alberta,
Oh, wow.
and within a few years, ended up writing the manuals for the whole English-speaking world on both air and water pollution.
Right.
And so of course got involved in court cases, with companies. And so I would I would get the documents in advance to correct the English and make sure it was all cool. And I mean, by this time I was a teenager and I was smart enough to realize, man, I could make a lot of money.
Yes. Yes.
if I
Definitely.
if I passed these documents on to the relevant companies, they'd pay me a fortune for what. And I remember reading this and I thought,
Mm.
oh my goodness. I mean, of course I never did, but
Yeah, but you already had the entrepreneurial spirit back then.
exactly.
Oh, that's fantastic. So I mean, you picked up English pretty quickly then as well,
I,
along with, I'm assuming,
within,
school and friends.
I mean, within 6 months, I had no accent, nothing. You couldn't tell.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I can definitely say right now, you definitely don't have an accent at all. So
Oh
I
well.
wouldn't,
Oh
aside from your
well.
name, I wouldn't say that you were a German at all. But it's interesting and amazing to learn. I almost want to say that I'm assuming, completely acclimatizing to that, having the spirit and hardworking nature, did what you experienced in Germany and then subsequently in the United States, did that affect your almost want to say political psychology there? Or wasn't it, like you said, it wasn't even political ideologies that affected you? It was actually more, the Russians that affected you and the Americans that you were captured, that your father was captured by, that changed your political philosophy? Or was it formed later in your life?
It's really, it's really hard to know because what what goes on inside of us psychologically and mentally, because this isn't just a mental issue.
Mm.
Yeah, and living with this, knowing this, and going back and having relatives in Germany, and what they went through, um, um, really, it definitely affects you. Um, I still remember, when I was 21, I think 20, I don't know, something like that. I flew back to Germany and went to visit my aunt. Well, technically my great aunt, but
Mm.
uh, we were very, very close to her. And and she was still going around picking up cardboard. Um,
Oh.
I mean,
Mm.
not a whole. I mean, it's not like she didn't have any money,
Mm.
but it's so part of the psyche. So you heat your hot water, with cardboard and whatever. And I'm going, you've got a automatic hot water heater. I mean,
Mm.
like,
Mm.
but it's just stuck in there.
Right.
It forms you. And so how much of that formed me today, it's really hard to tell. Was it there? Yeah, obviously. And my father was very smart, and
Right.
I always had a very, very close relationship with my father. And so and who he was, and we
Mm.
we spent a lot of time talking. I
Right.
remember my father taught uh, um, teenage Sunday school at church,
Oh, yeah.
and I was a teenager at the time. And I remember my friends coming to me and said, "I'd give my right arm to have a father like you,"
Mm.
because he was open. You could talk to him about anything. And I know that really influenced me
Mm.
in ways that I don't know, they're really, really hard to tell today.
Mm.
But I know it did. I
Mm.
know that.
And professionally as well. I mean, you've mentioned your father was the inventor of vinyl. What exactly was his background? I'm assuming it's not as clear cut as it is today in terms of a specific degree, but I'm assuming by
No, he had
inventing vinyl, he
in
was
chemistry. Yeah, an advanced degree in
chemistry.
chemistry.
Okay. Okay.
And
Right.
I
Right.
probably went into chemistry because of that, but I switched into radiation chemistry. So I ran a
Okay.
nuclear accelerator in one of my other lives. That was a long time ago. So,
But that's fascinating. Could you tell us more about that? Sorry, I'm particularly interested in that type of technology.
um, yeah, we had there were three. We were working on electron structures. There were three labs in the world: one in the U.S., one in Canada, and Edmonton, and one in Holland, that were competing, on in this level. And we were the only ones that had a quantitative methodology. We could run everything through the computer and predict what was going on. And throughout my life, I mean, it's God. It gives all sorts of opportunities and puts you into situations that you really don't know what's going on, and then there are results that are really unanticipated. And this was one of those. I got in there. I can tell you how I got in there, but I don't think that's that relevant right now. But I was given a series of experiments to prove that what we as a overall research facility had developed was true.
Okay.
I hate to be so crass. Your job, here's another series, and we know exactly what the results are going to be, and your job is simply to prove that we're right. I ran, so I worked for several months, learning the system and all this kind of stuff. And anyway, I was the bottom of the totem pole. So I was 21 at the time, I think. And the guy opposite me was 35. He had 3 kids. He was a postdoc. I was the only non-PhD at that time working in the facility. All right. So I was bottom of the totem pole. Okay. So the only time I would get onto the nuclear accelerator would be Saturday nights, Sundays, when nobody else wanted to be there, and I'd have to get the technicians to work with me, because it took multiple people to run the whole thing, obviously, And so I worked for months now to finally get everything running and I get everything going and all this kind of stuff. And my Saturday night, of course, everybody else is gone, and I grab a couple of technicians. Hey, come on, overtime, whatever, Saturday night. Okay, great. And I run this thing through for the first experiment, and I am off by an order of magnitude. I mean, I am so far out of whack.
Yes.
And Monday morning, everybody's just laughing, saying, to the boss, brilliant guy, by the way, fantastic. It's what do you got this kid in here for? Come on, the guy's useless. I mean, look at the crap he just. Come on, this is just get this guy out of here. He's wasting their time, all this kind of stuff. Of course, I'm totally depressed. I mean, I'm completely. I have no idea what I did wrong. I mean, I worked my butt off for months, and here we go again. So I start all over again. And this time, I mean, I am meticulous, man. Now I know what I'm doing. So instead of several months, I did the whole thing in, I don't know, 2 or 3 weeks or whatever, because I had everything together. Oh, I got to tell you about the machine. Just wait, let me finish this story. And I ran it through, again on a Saturday, always Saturday night, by this time, nobody cared what in the world I got. And I got exactly the same results. And I said, I have no idea what's going on here.
Oh, no.
But I'm right. And you guys are all wrong. And then, anyway, through continued working on it and ended up, what I found out, I ended up developing 3-dimensional electron structures. What we didn't know, I know this sounds really crazy.
Right.
But the math that the math gets so complicated, you cannot visualize it anymore. Like quantum mechanics, it just, you can't, you use operators that work, but you can't visualize what those operators actually do. And what we did not know, this sounds so stupid, everything, all of our math was in 2 dimensions, it was 2-dimensional math. Well, guess what? The world is 3-dimensional.
Was it because the simulations were run in 2 dimension? Because I know you ran the calculations first through simulations before you did the actual tests, or
the math, whatever. And quite bluntly, it's too long ago now. I can't remember exactly. But we either reduced it down mathematically or never built it up. I can't remember which. I remember years later when I because I put it in my resume, and these
Mm.
days everybody checks us on the web, and if it's not on the web, it's not real. You're lying. So
Right.
I'm going around checking my name. I know I did this. I know this is real. I
Mm.
published the
Mm.
paper. Where
Yeah.
is this stupid paper? Anyway, finally took a lot of. Was not an easy find. I finally found it,
Mm.
and the mathematical formula that we used covered my whole computer screen, all the way across. And I'm looking at it, and just then my wife walks in behind me, and she's looking at at my computer screen. She goes, "What in the world is that?" Oh, she says, "Good grief." She says, "Don't tell me that's the research you did." I said, "Yeah, it is." She says, "Do you understand any of it?" I said, "Not a word."
It's been a while.
Not a word.
Oh wow! But I mean, you were at the forefront. You were developing these incredibly interesting technologies. But what made you switch to business? Because I mean, this sounds like you were extremely deep into
Yep.
chemistry and other types of research.
Well, I was a hardcore peacenik at the time, and I
Ah.
found out that the military was paying for all my work,
Oh yes.
and I couldn't handle that.
No,
So
no.
I walked out.
That'll definitely demotivate a person. Definitely, yeah, I
Yeah.
agree. Okay,
So
and then
so
what avenue did you take
well,
then
I
to go to
then I
business?
asked the research director. I said, "Well, give me a PhD because I've done
Right.
everything. I've
Yep.
published. What do
Mm.
you want?
Yeah, a PhD by publication.
Exactly." And
Right.
he says, "Well, you cheated." What do you mean I cheated?
What?
The equipment, not the nuclear portion, but the chemical equipment that we needed, it takes the average PhD student at least 2 years to build all that. First of all, to learn, and then you actually physically have to build this thing.
Mm.
And I didn't do that. What happened is when I walked in, the research director hired two technicians twice my age for
Mm.
me to build my equipment. And I remember walking into my room, here are these two guys in their 40s, and they're going, "Okay, what do you want us to build?"
You had to tell them exactly what to build,
"Oh yeah." And I go,
but then you built it.
"No," I go, "I haven't got a clue." So I, basically said, "Look, go home and read a book, whatever. Come back
Mm.
tomorrow."
Yeah.
I mean, I was just stunned. And I'm going,
Yeah.
"Geez, I got these two guys working for me." So I go back to the research director, and I said, "Okay, yeah." I said, "Oh, did not tell you I hired these two guys for you. What are they gonna build?" "Oh,
Yeah.
okay." Well, I said, "Get up on the on the blackboard, and okay, we got to do this, and we got to do this. I mean, I knew enough, obviously,
Mm.
generally, but what were the exact specifications of what it is that we had to do?" And so he outlined in graphically, not exactly what it would look like, but we got to do this, and we got to do this, and we got to do this, we got to do this, we got to do this, and we got to do this, and then you end up with this.
Mm.
"Oh, okay, you got it. Okay, I think I can design that. That I can design. I can't build it.
Mm.
I'm
Mm.
not good enough." But
Mm.
no, he says those guys will build it. You design it. Now you know what it is that needs to be done. So the next day they came back and said, "Okay, I got it all worked out. Here's a piece of paper. You got to do this, then you got to build this, got to go like this." "Well, what about, yeah, no, so, so okay."
Mm.
So
Mm. Mm. Mm.
so
Mm.
they I know within a couple of weeks built what would take a fresh PhD student 2 years to do, because
Right. Right.
they were professionals.
Yeah.
um, you know
Yeah.
so
And
that's
that
why.
was the director's reasoning as to why you cheated.
Yeah, you cheated. So he said, "I'll give
Okay.
you a PhD, but you have to hang around for another year and a half." He says, "And we have never ever done that. But hey, you've done it. So you got to hang around for another year. You can teach, I can teach at the university,
Mm.
and, you can whatever. And then I'll give you a PhD." And I said,
Mm.
"Thanks, but no thanks."
Mm. 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 Was that the point at which you started your master's in business administration, or rather, what made it pivot into masters? Sorry, into business rather. That's what I mean.
No, sorry. Um, no, I joined YWAM, Youth with a Mission.
Okay.
And what got me into business, well, anyway, forget all the details. What got me in business is so today I've worked in over 60 countries. So by that time,
Mm.
let's say, I don't know what, 35, 40, something like that. And I started realizing that uh, in the developing world, people are not stupid. People are not lazy. but they can work 10 hours a day, 7 days a week, and still have trouble putting food on the table.
Right.
And there's something fundamentally wrong. Something isn't working here. And I got more and more involved in finance anyway. The last 5 years in life, pretty well everything I did was finance. But during that time, um, I started thinking through what is the, and I got more and more angry because I said,
Right.
what is the fundamental issue? And people knew I was grappling with this, and so they would say, well, Kortsch, well, what's the answer? And I go, I have no idea. I don't know what the answer is. And I had a Christmas. We rented a large chalet in the mountains for the whole family, and I think you've got to have a time off for you to relax. And I had this massive download as to the whole monetary system and what the problem was and why it wouldn't work and all that kind of stuff. Then then I went back and did my MBA in economics, and trying to get more of a hardcore handle on sort of the theory side of it, because I knew I was shooting from the hip.
Yeah, and I mean, you having a background in science, I know this from a couple other people that they may have started in engineering or science, and they got this concept, this way of thinking from first principles, thinking from fundamentals when tackling a problem, and then going into business. They're actually very successful because of it, because they were able to boil the problem down, saying, what exactly is wrong with us, right? and then building it up from that point and forward. I'm assuming that gave you a great edge in terms of thinking. And that's what kickstarted it, I'm assuming.
Yes, very much so. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we see a lot of that today. I mean, one of the most famous examples that I like to quote a lot is, of course, I don't know your opinions on Elon Musk, but he's definitely as well, a physicist first, an engineer, and that's why in his business he also thinks from first principles. But taking a bit back and taking from your experience, and obviously your great knowledge about West Germany and its development, there was you mentioned your aunt, or rather great aunt, collected cardboard to be able to heat her water. I know from my grandfather, who also lived on a farm, he was here in South Africa, but they actually had Italian POWs sent to his farm to work there as part of what happened in the war. And my point being is that during that same period of time, the time of the Great Depression and so on, and economic regression, these people scrounged together whichever resources they could, and then saved everything. They worked with everything. There was such a specifically difficult time that it ingrained in their memory. But it was also a time of social welfare programs starting to become more common, something that we have every day today. Then was the thing that really got started. And I know that the US had the big social, I think it was the Marshall Plan in West Germany to help rebuild it afterwards.
That's right.
Do you think that social welfare programs such like the Marshall Plan and the ones that we have today, and the actions of, say, companies or organizations like the Federal Reserve Bank in the States and the World Bank in the world, do you think those actions during the Great Depression actually worsened the Depression, or did it improve it? Like, what exactly do social welfare programs do to affect those types of situations?
Let me, if I may, gently correct you. I would not put the Marshall Plan together with social programs.
Okay.
That's really different. Let's talk about the Depression here. There were two different things, which there always are. So one is monetary and the other is fiscal. And I think certainly on the monetary side, there were huge mistakes made by the Federal Reserve, because coming out of the Roaring 20s, so the crash was 1929, the stock market crashed, and then things kept on going downhill from there. Money was free and easy, and so the thought was, we need hard money. We need to get back to a debt system that was more stringent as to what we actually provide. And so what the Federal Reserve did, is tighten up the money supply at the very time when a looser system would have really helped. So I think, from what we know historically, they really amplified the negative effects because of the hard money thinking at that particular time. And by the way, I'm in favor of hard money, so this is kind of
yeah.
all right.
Yeah.
But the timing was really wrong. I mean, I'm not Keynesian in my thinking, that's for sure. However, I do recognize that at times of extreme difficulty, you can, quote, sort of break the rules temporarily as long as you revert afterwards. By the way, and that's what Keynes said. That's a part of Keynes nobody ever reads. They say, well, yeah, you need the central stimulation, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. But Keynes very clearly said, and then when that's over, you got to repay this stuff.
Right.
Okay?
Yeah.
And guess what? Nobody does that. Nobody does that.
Yeah. Debt builds upon debt.
Exactly. So that's the monetary side. On the fiscal side, then we're talking about social programs, and yeah, I mean, we created the FDIC, the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, during that time. The Social Security program came in place during that time, and especially the FDIC is really needed under the current crazy banking structure. That's because I'm really against the current banking structure, but considering what we have to have the FDIC. What I'm advocating is a different banking structure where we don't need the FDIC, and a lot of we can get rid of 90% of the regulation, probably 97% of the regulation, because the system can be self-regulated, but that's not where we're going. And so while we are not there, we do need those things. The you know, I don't know if Walter Williams just died just a few days ago, who was a lot of people think so. He's African American, black economist, head of the economics department at George Mason, and a good number of people figured he was the top economist in the second half of the last century. And he was very anti a lot of the social programs, especially for Black America, because it is what puts you down. So do we need safety nets? Yeah, I really think we do. They can be self-regulating also. However, the way they're structured, I have a lot of questions about a lot of them. What I'm advocating from a monetary perspective would actually replace probably 50 or 60 or 70% of those and create greater equality without redistribution of wealth. This is possible. This has been advocated before. During the Great Depression, the Chicago Plan, which what I'm advocating is a modified Chicago Plan, because our banking structures, our monetary structures, fiscal structures have changed since the 1930s. So obviously you have to make some changes. But almost every economist in the United States signed off on it, saying this is what you need to do to break the Great Depression. Of course, it wasn't done. The big banks killed it. The big banks hated it because they said, "Oh my goodness, we're not going to make the same kind of profit." So, yeah, while we are living in a monetary structure that is crazy, then yeah, we got to have some of those things. So, but we don't have to have them if we would just change the fundamental, the fundamental system.
Right. Sorry, I just need to clarify some of those things. You mean the FDIC?
Yes.
Okay, and then could you just shortly, just for the non-American viewers that aren't quite as familiar with it, just quickly describe exactly what does the FCIDC do, rather?
Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation is pretty well, I mean, that's the American name, but the equivalent is in all of the OECD countries. Sorry, OECD, the 37 wealthiest countries in the world. They guarantee a certain level of bank deposits per account. And so since the 2007-2008 crash, it's gone from 100,000 to 250,000, which is where it's at today. And so the underwriting of the federal government provides that. However, the banks pay into it. So banks pay a premium every month to cover the that default money, which is what the FDIC money really is.
Right.
However, what's interesting is by law, it only needs to cover, I'm glad you're sitting down, I think you are, 1.15% of all the deposits. How's that?
But that's way too little. That's by far too little. So if people default on their loans and there's a cash rush, then there's not even remotely enough to cover all of the debts.
And that's exactly what happened during 2007, 2008. So what happens is the federal government, us as taxpayers, then get called in, and it took years, I can't remember how many years, to bring it up to the tiny amount of 1.15%.
Right.
Took years to get back up to that.
Because it is such a ginormous problem, and the debt is so incredibly big. I kind of want to know, do you think that that percentage problem and the requirements that were set for it, was that a mistake from the organization or the group that created the FDIC, or was it the big banks as poor planning that they thought this is the amount that we need, so this is how much we'll pay in to create that? That default.
That's an interesting question. I really don't know. It certainly serves the banks because it lowers their premium that they end up having to pay. Interesting. I mean,
the incentive, the monetary incentive there then isn't there for the banks. So perhaps since they're the ones that's supplying it and pushing it, perhaps they have some sort of, leverage in terms of not increasing that premium, which
sure.
Obviously.
Oh, absolutely. Oh,
right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So there's a direct incentive for them to not rectify that. But going back to the crash, it's actually great that you mentioned it. Do you think that the crash has since been rectified? The 2007 crash specifically has since been rectified, or do you think that this will only be rectified once that you said we've worked if you guys have worked very hard to get it up to 1.5%? It'll only be rectified by the point that's some sensible number.
Well, the question is, what caused the crash?
Right.
So in order to answer, have we solved the issues, then we should probably talk first about what caused the crash. And I would say that the two primary issues are opaque leverage and complexification. Let's talk about those two. So opaque leverage. Opaque simply means you can't see it.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah.
Leverage is debt buildup. Okay. So, for instance, let's talk about the banks. I mean, we're talking about subprime mortgages and CDO squared and securitization and all sorts of other things which are part of the 2007, 2008 crash. Let me just kind of simplify it. Banks are massively leveraged and it's totally opaque. You have absolutely no idea. So let's start with a deposit. So when you deposit $100 or pesos, whatever your currency is, into quote your bank account, what actually happens? Well, if you read your banking contract carefully, which nobody does.
Nobody ever does.
Nobody ever does. It says that the moment you deposit your money into your account, it stops being your money. It's not your money anymore. Now it is merged. It belongs to the bank, and the bank makes a promise. It says, when you want your money back, I promise to pay it.
Right.
But while I have your money, it's not your money anymore.
Right.
And so banks are the only corporations in the Western world that are allowed to commingle outsiders' money with their own money. That's a special, nobody else is allowed to do that. You do that, you go to jail. Okay. So on an equity basis, we do that. But when you deposit $100 into your bank account, that is not equity. You now become, we call it general obligor. That means if the bank goes bankrupt, you stand in line like everybody else because, quote, your money isn't actually there.
Right.
Does not exist. Okay.
And that promise is like, how strong is that promise? Is there a legal basis behind it, or is it just, well, that's, we've bankrupt, so sorry.
Then we get to the FDIC. That's the whole point of the FDIC.
Right.
So the FDIC says, okay, I'll tell you what, if a bank goes bankrupt, then we promise to cover. Today it's $250,000. In the past it was only 100. Okay, and for different countries it's different amounts.
Right.
It varies, because the people who understand the banking system know that the money isn't actually there. It doesn't exist. Okay, so that's let's talk about the leverage side. So then the bank, that becomes part of the reserves. Man, we're getting technical here.
Yeah, it's very interesting. It's very important because most people, like you said, don't read this. They don't know this. This is important to explain.
They have no idea.
Yeah.
We have a fractional reserve banking system. What does that mean? Well, first of all, it's fractional. What is a fraction? It's only a part.
Right.
Let's get into how much the part is. What's a reserve? A reserve is two things. It's either cash in the vault or deposits at the central bank, which in the US is the Federal Reserve Bank, et cetera, in different countries. Okay. The combination of those two things equals reserves. So let's go back to the fraction. What is the fraction that the bank has to hold? Well, it's complicated. There isn't a single number. Legally in the United States, it's, quote, 10%, except for this, except for that, except for this, except for that, except for this, except for that. Oh, by the way, and you don't have to have any reserves. So by the time you're finished, in actual fact, it's 2 or 3%.
Right. Yeah.
So when you deposit your $100, the bank holds $2, and $98 go away. Where do they go to? Well, they invest them. They go into all sorts of things. They can, they are allowed to leverage. They don't leverage it up. Maybe later on in the discussion we would get to that. So that's the fractional reserve. That's the opaque leveraging that I just talked about. You have no idea what your bank does with the money. Absolutely no idea. Absolutely.
And do you also have no right to?
No,
I mean,
you really
specifically,
don't.
you don't. Okay.
You can read their annual report. That's as much information as they're going to give you.
Yeah, yeah. But in practice, then you're at least to a far majority percentage, you're a shareholder in whichever the bank invests in.
No, you're not.
Okay, so you don't have any of the normal shareholder privileges.
Absolutely none. You're a general obligor.
Okay. So then you have extremely little amount of power. Also, more important, also it's important to note that for the people that want to know more of the technical details, you wrote a book on this, didn't you?
Yeah.
Could you introduce that book for us?
Yeah, I'm just putting out my second book. As a matter of fact, I've got the galleys right here. That's what as soon as we're off this call, that's what I'm going back to. Yeah. So the first book, The Next Money Crash Dash and How to Avoid It. That was a conference I ran at the Federal Reserve Bank. So back to what I mentioned 15 minutes ago, whenever it was, the chalet we had in the mountains. And so then very shortly afterwards, I was asked to run a conference at the Federal Reserve Bank here in the US to go through this. And that conference is the book, basically. There's some editing in there. Because we don't talk the way we speak. We don't talk the way we write. I'm sorry.
That's not what you mean.
But it says what people said. I put a video out on that. So the whole day is concentrated into a 40-minute video, which you can go online. It's on YouTube. And if you go to my channel, which back in the days when I put that together, you had to use your email address. So it's youtube.com/Uli Kortsch, UKORTSCH.
Okay. We'll also link it in the description for anybody that's interested.
Okay. Then go down. The oldest video is my talk at the Fed. That's actually not that important because that was a wrap up looking at social issues, which to me are really, really important, what this is all about. But the next video up, the second oldest video, is the 40-minute recap of the whole day. Okay. And I've got every single speaker in there. Top people from around the world, basically explaining this is how the system works. This is what we need to do. And we're going to hell in a handbasket.
Okay. Okay. And that's how to, like, you said that, what will be the next crash and how to prepare for it. That first part is how what will be the next crash, and then how to
Right.
prepare for it. You mentioned that these people talk about it. How prepared are we?
Very, very, I'm very unprepared.
I assumed so, but I mean, like, what? I don't want to spoil the book because I think people should definitely go and read it. But just in terms of saying, how can people prepare? What is the level of input and actions that they need to take that you could describe?
I'm going to get there in just a second. Most of what I deal with is systemic, is the country as a whole. But let's talk about. I think your question deals with individuals.
Right.
Our greatest fear tends to be inflationary because of the Weimar Republic. Let's see, over a period of 2 years.
Yeah.
Maybe it was 3 years.
That was a big crash.
The exchange rate, this will blow you away.
Yeah.
The exchange rate to the US dollar of the German mark went from 4.2, let's call it 4 to 1 to 4 trillion to 1.
What?
Yes, over a period of 2.5 years. Went from 4 to 1 to 4 trillion to 1.
But then that money is literally not even dust worth.
Well, the stacks of money. I've got a picture in the new book coming out, which is a fairly well-known picture. It's kids playing with stacks and stacks of money because the stacks of money was cheaper than the toys they could have played with. Oh yeah.
That's horrible. That's horrific.
I have an actual story in there, the guy's name in there, et cetera, who was a well-off middle-class person in Germany who had saved all his life for his retirement. And he had 100,000 marks, which was enough for a whole retirement for his whole life at a middle class. Okay.
Right.
He went, drew all his money out and bought what he could, which was a subway ticket.
He could, for his whole life savings, could buy a subway ticket
because of that crash.
Wow.
He went, drove around the town, went home, and locked himself in his apartment.
Right.
And of course, everybody thinks at that point, well, then he committed suicide. No, he didn't commit suicide. He starved to death. This was, at the time, the most advanced economy in the world.
Yeah, that's scarily familiar.
This really meant something to me because my grandparents, somebody in their house in the basement starved to death. And I'm going, how can you allow somebody to starve to death?
Yeah.
Well, there wasn't anything. Everything fell apart. Nothing worked anymore.
But that's such an alien concept for people that don't necessarily understand how these financials work. Because the one day you have stores full of food and apples, and the next day nothing. Like how exactly is that leap even possible from the one day to have no resource, from one resource to have no resources? That's almost unfathomable.
It just happened 6 or 8 months ago. We called it the COVID crisis, and all of a sudden we ran out of toilet paper. And we ran out of, and what do you mean? This is ridiculous.
Right.
So especially with our JIT, JIT system, just in time, nobody stores anything. I mean, I'm talking about commercially.
Yeah.
And so we're trying to bring some of that back. Every country is, to a certain extent, where they realize the height of efficiency is very fragile.
Right.
The more efficient you become, the more fragile the system. And we have driven everything towards efficiency in such that food. So for instance, all of a sudden here in the US, you couldn't buy any meat.
Right.
How come? Well, because the meat packing plants, nobody stores anything. And they shut a bunch of them down because there were so many COVID cases. I mean, one meat packing plant alone, they had 370 people got COVID. And so you shut it down all of a sudden and you go, what do you mean there's no meat?
Yeah. It's difficult. It's difficult to think that, or I want to actually say it's easy to forget that if people don't make stuff, there are no stuff. Because people make stuff. And if people don't get paid to make stuff, they're not really motivated to make the stuff, especially if they're forced to stay at home. So the motivation there is to have a type of reserve, like a rainy day type of situation where if this thing happens again, that people don't starve to death. and
That's right.
that's the core basis of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, you have a situation where you describe now where you have one of the world's most strongest and wealthy economies. You know, wink, wink, nudge, nudge. We have one of those today, and then within a couple of days, you describe the horrific situations that they have today. I mean, we hear a lot of talk, especially from people that aren't in the U.S. and we follow some of the most talked about political issues. One of them is the debt issue, as you've explained.
Yes.
Do you think this will, because it's so immensely large, the problem seems so large that you really have to go down to the fundamentals to be able to solve this. Do you think this will ever be addressed? Because at the moment, from an outside perspective, both sides of the political spectrum are just keep on increasing the debt. How do you address this problem?
You asked several questions. Let me answer one of
them. Sorry.
Will it be addressed? No, not until we have a crash. The crash will address it. Let me define debt. Let me just talk about debt, and then let's get back to the questions that you asked. Debt, very simply, is future production pulled forward. That's all debt is. Okay? So the more debt we have, the less future production we have, because we're pulling it forward. Right. Okay. So that's a problem. That's one of the reasons why all of the OECD countries, why their growth is going down and down and down and down and down and down, because we've pulled all this stuff forward. How come we're not growing? Well, because we've already eaten that. As in Africa, the Africans would say, well, we eat that. It's like bribery, etc. It's eating.
Yes.
Well, this is eating the future. Debt is eating the future.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's number one. We've already eaten the future. No wonder the future isn't producing very much. Okay. Now, next point. There are a lot of economists who are wrong. There are a lot of economists
right.
who say debt is not a problem because in our double entry bookkeeping system, every liability is an asset somewhere else. So we cannot have a debt without an asset. So therefore, don't worry about it. The two always balance each other out. Completely true fact, completely wrong conclusion.
Right.
Let me explain why. We were talking earlier about banking and how banking works. How do I say this in 2 minutes? Debt creates money. There is no money without debt. Okay. Right. The central banks do. We think that the Fed or your local central bank creates money. No, they don't. It's the commercial bank around the corner. What happens? Let me walk you through. So you want to buy a car, and so I'm talking from an American perspective. So let's say use an American manufacturer. We use Ford. Keeps it all and makes it a little simpler. So I want to buy a Ford. I go to the bank, and I want to borrow $30,000 to buy a Ford. Okay, fine. So the bank looks at me, Kortsch, yeah, okay, cool. That's okay, fine. So they issue a contract. Okay, that contract is an asset to the bank. The bank is now out of balance.
Because they've already given...
Sorry,
I mean, because they've already given all of the financials. They already have given the hard cash that they have.
No. Hang on. No.
Right.
Hang on. The contract is an asset. They're out of balance. They need a liability in order to balance it too. How do they create that liability? They create it out of nothing. Right. They hit a few keys on the computer, and you now have $30,000 in your bank, and the bank is balanced. You've just created $30,000.
Yeah.
Now, most people think it goes like this. Let me walk you through it. Okay, so I want to borrow $30,000. The bank writes a contract for me. They then move $30,000 into my account from somewhere else. I take that $30,000. I go to the Ford dealer with some extra money. Forget about the extra money for the time being, and I pay the $30,000 to the Ford dealer. The Ford dealer pays the $30,000 to Ford Motor Company, Ford Motor Company pays the $30,000 to the worker, and the worker happens to be banking at my bank. Aren't I lucky? And that's where the bank got the $30,000 from, which went into my account. The only problem is that's a circle. It never came from anywhere. Think about it. I just created a circle. So, but where did the 30,000 come from? Nowhere within the circle. Okay, so what actually happens is what I just told you. It creates an asset. The bank arbitrarily on its computer says, bing, it creates $30,000 worth of bank money, which I can now spend. And we get more technical. But let me get even. So let's see what happens a year from now. I've got a really good year. And let's say that the bank charges me 10% interest, very high interest. It's a nice round number. Let's just forget about it. Okay.
Yeah.
So a year later, I go back to the bank. And let's say I've not had to make any payments. And I say, Mr. Banker, I've had a fantastic year. I want to pay all my loan off. What happens? Well, first of all, what do I owe them? Well, I owe them the $30,000 plus 10% interest, which is $3,000. So I owe them a total of $33,000. So I give the $33,000 to the bank. What happens? Well, the $3,000, that is income to the bank. The $30,000 is destroyed.
Because it never existed in the first place.
It never existed in the first place. And it does not exist every time you make a principal payment on anything. If you pay your credit cards off at the end of the month, you've destroyed all that money. Every mortgage payment you make on your house, every payment on your car, on anything that you owe, every time you make a principal payment, you are destroying that money. So what happens is we constantly have to have more and more and more and more debt. Because as the economy grows, assuming velocity is equal, which it isn't, but that gets too complicated. Okay, as the economy grows, the amount of money in circulation has to grow. In order for that to occur, we have to have more debt.
Right.
That is what debt does, and it ultimately kills us. Let's go back to the economists who say debt doesn't matter because every liability has an opposing asset. That is true technically, mathematically. It is not true in reality for the simple reason it is based on the expectation of a future capacity which does not yet exist.
Right. And I mean, I also want to say that this could also be exemplified, at least if you can tell me if I'm understanding it correctly, but this could be exemplified by people that take loans out against stocks. Because that's also stocks margin. In its essence, its value is the promise of growth for a company. Otherwise, people wouldn't buy stocks unless those stocks give dividends, but that's a different conversation. But my point being is that if you take debt out against stocks, then you hope that stock increases in price so that you can pay off that debt or at least maintains its price. So that's almost want to say a more intense version of creating money where there isn't any, because you're creating money on the hope for growth. And yet you've mentioned that these countries have stopped growing because they've already ate the future. So this is almost want to say, a train heading for a brick wall. There really is no way to quite address this issue. I understand or at least I appreciate the seriousness of it now. It just feels a bit futile. And a lot of people, they really want someone to address this problem. People that realize this, they want to address this problem, and they generally, of course, with any national size problem, they then look to the current presidential administration to solve that problem. It's different administrations have said that there's never a better time. I think specifically it was Trump that said it's never a better time to borrow money than right now. So they often give time as the excuse as to when to borrow money. Do you think the next administration can deal with it? Which one is the next administration? Do you think they can deal with it? Just time will eventually solve this? Or they can maybe stop the growth of which we're eating the future and sometime we'll catch up with the future?
No. It's political suicide to do it.
Right.
It's like Jean-Claude Juncker, the former president of the European Union, said.
Right.
It's not that we don't know what to do. It's that if we do it, we'll not be reelected.
Oh, okay. So they have no incentive to do it.
No incentive.
Okay.
The incentive is all in the wrong direction.
Okay.
Politicians always want more debt.
Right. it makes them look better in the short term. But I mean, that's
Of
probably
course
the
it does.
reason why in some countries where you have a debt system, but the politicians aren't interested in re-election, say authoritarian systems, Chinese systems, other type of governmental systems, they can address that problem because the long term is in their interest.
Yeah, even there they have problems doing it because
Right.
ultimately, even in a totalitarian government, if the whole country were to turn against them, it wouldn't work either. So there's even though you don't have elections, um, there's a there's a certain sense where you do have to keep the population happy, especially the military population. You know?
Right. Right. Yeah. I mean, those are the ones that help them keep their power.
Exactly. That's right. Yeah.
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 Yeah. So I know that you've recently helped. You can actually tell me how recently it was because I'm not exactly quite sure this, but you recently helped the Swiss government establish a new Chicago-based system. How did that work out? What exactly does that mean or entail?
We tried and we failed.
Oh, I see.
That doesn't mean we will not fail in the future.
Hmm.
Um, it was only 2 years ago, so it
Okay.
was very, very, very recent. Um, the okay, forget about, and I can go into Swiss law as to
Hmm.
why that is possible to do in Switzerland versus in many other countries. If you
Hmm.
want, if you work in it, I can explain that. I was
Hmm.
asked to come in and run a conference by Swiss people. Swiss people invited me because they know what I do and what I've done in the past. And
Right.
could you come and run a conference and bring in people from around the world, experts, and also some Swiss people as to what this is all about? And I said, yes, I will, but it has to be neutral. Um,
Okay.
I will present. I will present both sides. No, not I will. They knew very well where I come from, but
Yeah.
I will bring people in from both sides and explain what this is really about. And I
Hmm.
mean, we hit the front page of the Wall Street Journal. We were press all over. I mean, the
Right.
whole world woke up and said, "What in the world is going on?"
Yeah.
I'm really serious.
Hmm. Hmm.
Yeah, wow. Um, and then ran a referendum, and we only got 25% of the vote. The media campaign was very poor.
Wow.
I was really upset. That's
Hmm.
another story. I was very upset. There were
Hmm.
some really bad decisions that were made,
Hmm.
um, and we only got 25% of the vote. What's interesting is a completely independent survey organization, let's say 2 weeks, very shortly after the referendum, did an independent survey and found out that 80% of the Swiss population wanted what we were trying to do.
But the Swiss population is based on a federal referendum system. If so,
Yeah,
if they didn't
exactly.
vote for it,
But because the media campaign was so terrible, they
oh,
didn't
I
know what they were
see.
voting for.
Okay, so the independent service system explained the situation better, and therefore people made it more.
Exactly.
Okay,
Yep.
but the referendum was done, so
Yeah. However,
okay,
there are numerous cases where the same thing has been run 2, 3 times, several years apart,
right,
and people slowly get the message as to what this is really all about. Uh,
okay,
okay, I'll give you a really crazy example. This is very true.
yeah,
In the midst of okay, the legal there's about a 2 year run up where you have to go through all sorts of steps
mm,
in order to
mm,
get to the point where you actually run the referendum. All right.
mm.
One of the last steps is there has to be a debate in Parliament.
Okay,
On the day of our debate, I am not exaggerating, they spent 2 hours debating whether cows' horns should be cut. And they spent 15 minutes debating whether the monetary system should be changed. That is a fact.
okay. Is this an example of the people's interests or their,
Total lack of
how
understanding,
uninformed they are, or is it?
completely uninformed.
Okay, so
And even though we had some top Swiss people, working with us, um, the media campaign was just awful.
okay, okay,
Pardon me, all
so
my Swiss friends. If you happen to be watching this, I love you dearly, but it was really
yeah.
awful.
Yeah. So you said, because you said the whole world's media woke up to this and they focus on the situation.
Yeah.
If you said then that the media campaign was horrible, what exactly do you mean that did they change? did they misrepresent the goal of the New Deal? Or exactly, why were they so poorly covered if there was so much media attention?
The when I talk about media, I talk about global media.
Okay.
The media campaign within the country was
Oh, I
terrible.
see. Okay.
Yeah, the
Okay.
global media, like the you know, the one of the speakers I brought in was Martin Wolf, the chief economist for the
Right.
Financial Times. I mean, people around the world people say, "Oh man, this is wow! Look at this. We
Yeah.
really need this." And the Swiss are going, "I don't know. It's really."
Yeah. Well,
I gotta watch
they
this is
weren't
on a
informed.
video, so I gotta watch what I say.
Yeah. But they weren't informed. I understand what you mean
No, yeah,
in terms
yeah.
of that situation. So I want to know, do you ever, like, you have stories like this, for example, you know, do you ever feel like your advice is listened to at all? Did you have other situations where it was much more successful and the media covered it properly and a really objective decision could be made about it?
Very rarely. I have a friend of mine who's worked for multiple American presidents, knows personally quite a number here in the U.S., quite a number of senators and House members, members of Congress. And he said to me multiple times, he says, "Uli, I cannot bring 5 members of Congress into a room who actually understand what you're talking about. Not even 5 out of 430, roughly."
Yeah.
Yeah, he says they haven't got a clue what you're talking about.
Right. Yeah. There's I almost want to say it's a little bit of a state of complex bureaucracy where they're consolidating power. I actually have a quote. I think there was a libertarian economist, Donald supplied this, a libertarian economist, Thomas Sowell, that said while he worked for the state, he had learned that even with evidence, so even if they knew that they had the evidence, that it would not be beneficial. So bureaucrats will still want to install programs to further their power, even if they had the evidence to do so otherwise. So, do you believe that this is the case? I mean, you just gave an example of it.
It's very much there in the political field.
Okay.
It's even there in the academic field. There's an enormous amount of obfuscation that I must confess must be deliberate. I don't know how else to explain it.
Okay.
I quote regularly from a piece. A number of central banks issue quarterly bulletins. The Fed does, the Bank of England does, et cetera, where they're always short and they're for a broader audience, fairly technical audience, but still broader, dealing with issues that they feel are particularly pertinent to that at that moment. There's one put out just a few years ago by the Bank of England, and it's called "Money Creation in the Modern Economy." That's the actual title.
Okay.
And the whole thing, again, it's short. These things are always short because they want people to read them. This isn't a book. 3 times in this short little piece, it says, "We realize this is not what's taught in university textbooks."
Okay. Did they just openly admit?
You've got to be kidding me. And I quote, so the new book coming out, I quote extensively from this one bulletin they put out, quarterly bulletin. And I'm saying, yeah. And so help me to understand why even in universities, I mean, I've taken economics courses, and they don't teach you this. Why do they deliberately teach what doesn't actually happen?
And do you have any ideas, like in your book, did you explore that further, or was it just bafflement at the moment for why they wouldn't teach this important information?
I think because it is so explosive.
Okay.
Here's a quote from Henry Ford. So this was back Henry Ford. I mean, holy cow, what are you talking? I don't know what, 1940s. I don't know when. Hey, the guy's been dead for decades and decades and decades. He said, if the average American understood how our money system actually worked, there would be a revolution in the street tomorrow morning.
Okay, but I have to know, do you think a revolution in the street tomorrow morning would solve that problem?
Well, I think people would finally get so angry that they realize, what, we are being jerked around like there's no tomorrow. Like a significant portion. I mean, what interests me about all this stuff? A significant portion of our social problems are caused directly by our monetary system.
Right.
Directly.
Right.
So I was talking to, I have a friend who's one of the top messaging service in the world. I mean, they're very expensive, but I said to him some time ago, I said, if I had $10 million to spend on this, I'd say, I just want you to do one thing. For $10 million, just teach the average American public that all of their money is created by debt. And if there were no debt, they wouldn't have any dollars in their pockets. And that's going to start waking them up saying, well, what the heck's going on here? What is going on? No wonder the rich get richer.
Yeah.
It is baked into the system. I mean, I know, personally, a number of the Fed people and, people in the Federal Reserve Bank. And they're good people.
Yeah.
They're trying to do the best they can with the tools that have been given them. They have the wrong tools. And it is not their purview, and legally they're not allowed to change those tools. All right. So that's not the issue. The issue ultimately is legislation. For several hundred years, the word economics was never used. It was always the political economy. It was always the two words were always put together. We don't do it anymore because we now somehow seem to think that economics is a hard science, kind of like gravity or physics or whatever. No, it's not.
Yeah.
Anyway, go ahead. It's law driven.
No. My point being is that humans are involved. So as someone that has a background in social sciences, the second you involve humans in any type of system, it's not going to work out, quite the way you think. So I want to ask a two-part question for this is, one, do you think that because the problem seems so unsurmountable, like this is not an addressable problem, the debt problem, that it's actually easier for people to not understand this? Like even if you explain this, they wouldn't want to understand this because it's not an easily solvable problem. So it's not one they want to have.
No. It's not a problem that most people can speak into.
Right. And do you think that that's something, because it is becoming such a, even though it's a problem people don't want to have, it's becoming one that they can't ignore? Do you think that's something that will change under the Biden administration?
No, I don't think so. If things get worse, then yes.
Okay.
Then we're forced to,
Right.
No.
Is this not something that's better dealt with proactively, so before it gets worse?
Oh my goodness. Well, that's why I put the first book out.
Right.
Say, look, you guys, it doesn't have to be this. We don't, I for years, I talked to people and I said, man, come on, we know what to do. We don't have to have this huge, and by the way, this time it's going to be global because we're all facing the same issue. It's not going to be a single country.
I mean, the economy is so intertwined by this point.
So intertwined. It'll be the whole world. All hell will break loose. It doesn't have to. The train is going down the road and I see the cliff like you just said. Let's put the brakes on. We know what to do.
Yeah.
And I've come to the conclusion. So that's why the next book is, all right, let me tell you how to rebuild it.
Right. So just say, like, what is it? What could you shortly describe exactly what is it that we're going to hit? What is this where we're heading for that you described to? Is that just the complete crash of the financial system? For the
really
umpteenth time, but even worse.
And it can happen in an hour. I mean, an hour. Because so just like in 1929 with the Great Depression, it started with the stock market crash. Now with the electronic trading that we have, I know we've got triggers that stop it and all sorts of things, but we can hit a trigger and we can hit a trigger, and the thing just keeps on crashing.
Right.
And especially, quite bluntly, ETFs, exchange traded funds, they really scare me. By the way, I like ETFs from the point of view of an individual investor. They have an unbelievably low expense ratio. But here's the problem. Okay, first of all, in the US, there are more ETFs than there are stocks. What? Yes, that's true.
So is it just because that's the way the transactions are done, or how exactly is it possible?
Well, because each ETF has a different specialty. Okay. And so you can have more specialties than there are stocks that you can invest in, and that's currently the situation. That's not what's really bad. What's really bad is people do not research anymore.
Right.
In the past, even within mutual funds, but less so in mutual funds, if you invest in an individual stock, you're going to research that stock. You can understand that stock. You can understand what it's all about. Okay. Then we go to mutual funds where you're going, okay, I'm still going to really kind of look at this. ETFs, people say, well, I'm just going to buy a technology ETF.
Right.
What's in it? I don't know.
Right.
I don't, it's technology, man. Well, I'm going to buy a bio ETF. Well, what's in it? I don't know.
Mm. Mm.
And the amount of research that people put is less and less and less and less and less.
Mm.
So, okay. All right. So you think you know what sector of the economy is going to do well, and you buy that ETF. All right. All of a sudden, the price drops. Who's going to buy it? There are no buyers, because when people are all into ETFs, they all sell at the same time. And so in my mind, ETFs are one of the biggest, what I call force multipliers. It's not a trigger, it's a force multiplier. When it happens, it goes ka-bang.
Right.
Okay. And by the way, I think ETFs are brilliant, except for what they're doing for our stock market. So.
Yeah. So let's go back to a bit more of an international perspective. China currently has the Belt and Road initiative that I know you're quite knowledgeable about. If you could just shortly, explain to us what that is, and then also why it seems like, from my perspective at least, they're giving a lot of free money away. Like, what are they getting out of this?
So first of all, the Belt and Road is in some way similar to what the U.S. did 50, 80 years ago, where it's not hard power, it's soft power. So economic interrelationships in order to build up your system. So, and we initially thought, the US, thought that could be done with China, where if we increased the economic entanglements tends to be a negative word. I mean that positively. The interactions, the economic interactions. We're going to increase democracy. We're going to increase freedom in China. Exact opposites happened. Okay, so people have finally come to the conclusion, no, that doesn't work. But China is doing the same thing with their Belt and Road. What they're trying to use soft power, so cultural and financial influence, in order to have people like the Communist Party, like China as a government, etc. So that's what they're trying to do, which will help them directly, just like the U.S. was helped directly by all the economic interactions, but also helps them indirectly because of the system they're trying to push.
Right. Okay.
So it's a combination of those two things. So on the money side, there are two parts to this. One is that their terms are really quite nasty. And the Chinese have taken over a lot of the airports, seaports, etc., that they built, because the countries put themselves into situations where it's impossible to pay the debt back. So, okay, that works. That works for the Chinese, is what I'm trying to say. It doesn't work for the countries that get the money. Okay, and where does all this money come from? Well, now that you know, money is created by debt. It's not a problem.
They're creating their own debt. Yeah. Because it is a quite interesting situation where people seemingly think that, the United States, because it's a very public system, we have a lot of access to your national financial information. We always have this big number, the trillions of debt that the US is currently in. But it doesn't necessarily mean that the second largest economy in the world, almost want to see seemingly soon to be the largest economy in the world, is not also running off of the same debt system with the amount that they're spending in terms of what they're necessarily getting in. How much do you think is the CCP a threat to world stability, since so much of the world's production, I mean, we've seen it with the coronavirus, how that affected our stocks and different things that's manufactured in China. How much of a threat do you think is that to world stability?
Today, my answer today, I would say, is substantially different than what it would have been 2 years ago, even last year. Okay. But when I look at what's happened in Hong Kong, where they broke the treaty that they wrote, massively. Right. Treaty, beady, schneedy, bleaky, who cares?
Yeah.
Okay. And what they're doing with the Uyghurs, I just happened to see a report literally last night
Yeah.
on, I think it was BBC News, as a matter of fact, where somebody got in there and took unbelievable picture I've never seen before.
Yeah.
And the work camps that they're running, I mean, we got 1 million people in there behind barbed wire.
Yeah.
And so is it a threat to world peace? Yeah, massively. And and I think, like I said, I'm much stronger today than I would have been, a short while ago.
Right.
So you've got two world powers, and one is massively ascending, and the U.S. I would say over recent, certainly it appears to have been descending, and that creates tensions, and those tensions are dangerous.
Right.
Hopefully we don't get to a shooting war. That would be really bad.
But the thing is, sorry, but this is such an important part that you mentioned right now, because there obviously is a lot of fear that, because I remember at the beginning of the year, we had all of these, the looming threat, at least in popular media, from a third world war after the assassination of a general in Iran. But there's a lot of more real fears, we almost want to say, between China and the US. But there's that golden rule, is that whoever has the gold makes the rules. So, there's gold on both sides. They trade with each other almost, they're interlocked in change in terms of manufacturing and financial and production and design. Would they ever go to war with something, with a relationship that is even as tumultuous as it is, so lucrative?
I sure hope not.
Yeah. And that's the hope that we're hoping is pushing it back.
I mean, both are nuclear powers, and
right.
I think the probability of having a regional conflict, just like with the Cold War with Russia,
right,
and the U.S., where when you talk about Angola or Egypt or
right.
Even the Israeli conflict was the two sides where the Americans backed the Israelis and the Russians backed the Egyptians.
Right.
Where they, and then, yeah. I mean, Korea to a certain extent was like that. That was 70 years ago, where the Chinese actively backed, not just backed, but fought.
Right.
I mean, there were Chinese soldiers fighting in North Korea to make sure the Americans got out of the peninsula and then stopped at the 49th parallel, whatever it was.
Yeah.
So I would say regional conflicts more so to
more likely.
and strengthen their international standing, where they're saying, look at us. Just like with COVID right now, where the Chinese are actively saying, see, totalitarian system works. Yeah.
I mean, if things are horrifying, then a totalitarian system works, but it's not a basis to build a life on, at least. But exactly. Rather, I want to spin this into a more positive sense before we end. So I know that you're otherwise it'll be incredibly depressing. Yes. I know that you're part of a lot of some non-profits. Would you mind to say which ones you are, and maybe if you want one of them to be supported, please just give them a shout out.
Yeah, my biggest involvement right now is with two actually related groups. The Statesman Project, I think that's the website. The Statesman Project, Statesman plural, and then the other is the Global Council of Nations. Both of them deal with Christian or value-based strategies of leadership, economics, social policy. What is it that we have to do to bring truth and equity into our situation? Statesman is more project oriented. Global Council of Nations is relationally oriented. So the Statesman is much more public. I guess people can participate in that, and so I'm involved in public policy, and very, very much on the economic side. And spend a lot of time on it, trying to give input into different situations.
Well, we'll definitely be sure to link them as well in the description so people can look at that and support them if they have to. But we just have to say thank you so much for your time. This has been an absolutely enlightening discussion. I really, really enjoyed it. I also recommend people to go and look at your books. You have one available and the one is coming soon. Do you have a time frame on that?
Yeah, it should be out in January.
Okay.
I just, the publisher yesterday was saying, hey, where are you? And I said,
Yeah.
I'm doing all these little very minor, they're all grammatical kind of. There's a period missing here. There's a, all that kind of hogwash.
Right. Yeah.
But it's
Well,
got to be done. So
I mean, you can also link him this video and tell him these people are keeping me busy. Seriously, I'm sorry.
yeah, that's right.
Yeah. But thank you so much for talking. Is there anything else you wanted to add before we end this?
No, I just say, God help us with the train going down the track. It scares me. Really, really, it really does. So.
It does, but there is hope, and I don't want to. I mean, your first book exemplifies how we could avoid this. Yes. So hopefully, by sharing the message, getting the discussion going, it's more important to get that started than anything else in terms of preparing for it.
Yes.
But I just want to say thank you so much. This has been WorldView. Thank you so much for watching. If you've made it thus far, you most definitely have liked our discussions. We encourage people, our watchers, to like and subscribe. And consider donating on Patreon. It's a platform that enables us to create more of these and have more of these discussions that we value so much. So thank you so much again to Uli, and this has been WorldView. Thanks for watching.